So, my name is Craig Savage, and the title of my talk is Becoming a Data Scientist, with the subtitle of Advice for Those Seeking Employment. While this is primarily aimed at people looking to be a data scientist or in some related analytics field, it should be general enough that even if you're looking at something else, this can still have some good insights for you. Before we begin, some quick disclosures. I'm an independent consultant. These are my opinions, so don't take them to mean the opinions of anyone for whom I may in the future or in the past work for. These are my opinions. Also, a lot of this is going to come down to personal preference and interpretation. So the things I express are going to be my opinions. I'm going to encourage you to express your opinions, but there's no judgment. There's no right or wrong answer. So keep that in mind as I go through and give you some background about my experiences and my opinions. So let's start off with a high-level summary. And I want you to think about the type of employment you want. Again, while the title of this is to be a data scientist, you may want something completely different. You might want something tangential to data science, even if it's not the data science title itself. And that's the first point I want to make, is that I don't just mean the title when I ask what kind of employment you want, and I don't care what your degree says. So oftentimes people, when they get out of university, they spent so much time and energy getting this specific degree. They think that degree defines them, and that is what I want you to consider, and make sure you don't fall into such a trap. And then I'll go over the concept of Ikigai and that there's some trade-offs, but just to be clear, you are not defined by your job. And conversely, to some extent, you can define your job, so don't let your job define you. And when you can, try to define your job. And then I'll talk about it from a data science perspective, go into radar plots to help visualize your strengths and weaknesses, and then talk about expert-driven models. Oftentimes in data science, the kind of paradigm is someone gives you a file with a bunch of data, hence data scientist, and you use that data to create a model. I want to look at this from another perspective. If you have no data or very limited data, how do you create models? And then I'll talk about some other resources. But at a high level, flip the narrative. Employers aren't hiring skills, they're hiring you. And so what a lot of this talk is about is phrasing the question, not that they're hiring someone with these skills. Everyone focuses on the skills, but actually the important thing is the someone, especially if that someone is meant to be you. So let's talk about what types of employment. When I say data scientists, what does that really mean? And there's this infographic from a while ago that says data scientists are the sexiest job of the 21st century, and there are these 4 pillars: math and stats, programming and database, domain and soft skills, and then communication and visualization. Now, this is from about 3.5 years ago, and the field of data science has changed greatly in that time. And let's talk about some of the ways in which that's happened. If you look at the title data scientist, in those 3.5 years, and even before data science was really a term to be the sexiest job of the 21st century, there are other titles in analytics that are kind of related. Analysts, machine learning engineers, data engineers. Problem solver is a new one. If you're not a problem solver, I guess the other people are causing the problems, maybe. Data miner was huge 20 or 30 years ago, but I haven't really seen it since. Moving on to other possibilities on the more programming side, you get software engineers, solution architects, developers, programmers, automation engineers. On a more business side, you get insight analysts, data translators, business analysts, decision scientists, and those might seem more removed from data science. But having worked with some of these titles, which you might think are less technical, when you actually have a data science person or a data scientist on the other end, it can facilitate your life greatly. So even if you have that type of background, if you move into more of these managerial people roles, that background will help smooth out a lot of rough spots speaking with other data scientists if you have a technical background. And then finally, there's some other things that may seem even further removed, but again, if you're going to be a data scientist, even if you yourself don't work in data science, if you work with other data scientists, you can make things go a lot smoother. So that includes things like journey expert, which is a title I've seen several times, but I'm not really sure what it means. Change managers. A lot of your work as a data scientist is actually managing the change to go from a bunch of experts who think they have all the answers to let's look at the data and let's look at what predictive models are telling us. So at the end of the day, a lot of these titles don't necessarily mean what you think they mean. And until you unmask what this job is, you don't really know what you're in for. So while these titles are important, what actually goes on underneath can be highly varied. And I said that oftentimes people get a certain degree and they pigeonhole themselves into looking at that degree and what types of roles they might get. So if I look at the titles I've had in the past, systems engineer, research associate, etc., a lot of those job titles don't have corresponding degrees. And if I look at it from the other direction, if I look at the degrees I have, there's a little bit of overlap. So yes, I have engineering degrees and I've worked as an engineer. I have a degree in math and I was a mathematics instructor. But then there's other titles that I'm not really sure what to make of them. A manager of models management. I didn't know models management was a thing. Yes, you could do the modeling, but the governance around it, I hadn't really thought of until I had the job. I'm also kind of amused that I was a manager of management. It seems a little, repetitive. And then there's this term specialist master. I still don't know what that means. And furthermore, my current title is journey expert. So that title, journey expert, that I didn't know what it meant, that's been my title for the last year. And that may blow your mind. But wait, there's more. Because my contract says journey expert. But my boss, when she's presenting to her stakeholders, when she's getting the justification for hiring me, the title there is data scientist. And you may think, well, that's inconsistent. And if I explain my job to you, you may say, well, that's not real data science. But I want you to consider if I went to my boss and said, hey, boss, I see you have me as a data scientist. Well, according to some guy on the internet, I'm not really a data scientist. Could you go change it? How do you think she'd react? So when other people try to tell you whether you are or aren't something of these titles, keep that in mind, because saying, hey, could you go change my title on all these formal documents or informal documents just sounds a bit petty. And finally, as an independent consultant, I can call myself whatever I want. So in that aspect, what would you like to call yourself? Data scientist, yes, maybe. Senior data scientist? Data science guru? CEO? With a green field where you can call yourself anything, what would you pick? And more importantly, why? So there's this concept of Ikigai that can help you find the right job. It's a Japanese term for your reason for being, and you may have seen this Venn diagram consisting of 4 parts: what you love, what the world needs, what you get paid for, and what you're good at. And if you can find something at the intersection of all of those, that's Ikigai. Now, this data visualization is pretty good. My complaint about it is you can't have something that you love and what you get paid for without also deciding whether you're good at it or what the world needs. So while this visualization is good, I prefer one like this, which doesn't quite have the same symmetry and everything, but it does have all of those 2-way or 3-way intersections so that you can talk about any combination thereof. Now, these are some jobs I've had in the past, and here's where we start to get into personal preferences. And so I promise not to judge you for coming up with an answer different to mine. And in exchange, please don't judge me if you disagree with where I place some of these. So these are 5 jobs I've had in the past. Working on national missile defense, teaching mathematics, build algorithms to control the retinal implant, that is the bionic eye, research data science topics, build, evaluate, and implement credit risk models. And I want you to take a moment and A through E, put them somewhere on this Ikigai chart. Do you think they're what the world needs? Do you think you love them? Now, I'll give you a bit of a spoiler, and for me, I was good enough to get these jobs, and I did earn money at those jobs. So they're going to lie somewhere in here for me. But take a moment, and where do you think they would go for you? For me, they go here. The only one that I really found Ikigai was teaching, and the other ones goes some other places. I personally didn't really love doing research, nor for the bionic eye, even though it was a great project. It wasn't really where my passion was. Now, another problem with this Ikigai chart is that everything's binary. But of course it's not binary, and what if I put some numbers in here to talk about the salaries? And now you're starting to get trade-offs. That yes, me teaching mathematics was Ikigai, perfect thing, whatever. but it was half the salary of working on national missile defense. So this idea of Ikigai being binary isn't quite right, because there are still trade-offs about what you're good at. Well, how good at it are you? What you love, what the world needs aren't binary. They're kind of continuous. They may be hard to quantify, harder than salary, but there's still some ranking there rather than just being binary. So if I look at my current job, building credit risk models, I put it there. But the jobs themselves aren't fixed. If you're looking for a job and you're looking at the list of selection criteria or key responsibilities, you can think that whoever is posting the job knows exactly what they're asking for. Well, they probably don't. Requirements change, responsibilities change, teams change. When they hire you, their team will change, and what they need and the niche you can fill will be slightly modified. So once you get a job, you can start building professional relationships within the team, and as you gain a positive reputation, as you do good work, you can start to redefine your role. Whether that means you earn your manager's trust and you say, hey, I'd like to move this role somewhere else, or you can develop a business case once you understand the business, and then you can take this job and you can move it and push it in a direction you want. For me, that means taking whatever technical information I produce and mentoring junior data scientists, junior analysts, or going the other way. And if I build some fancy model and my management doesn't understand how it works, I explain it to them. Because for me, teaching is the important part. And so I would take whatever job and make it more teaching, pushing myself into this Ikigai area. For you, it may be different. You may be doing a data analyst role and you'd like to do some modeling. You may be using some BI tool and you'd like to do data visualization with R and Python instead. However you decide to shape the role, once you are ingrained in the business, you can try to push it so that you fall into this magical Ikigai area. But it's also important to note that this doesn't just apply to your job. While my job may be there are other aspects of my life which will augment this. The first one and the most obvious is family. Now, I put myself that I'm good at my family, but you'd have to ask my wife. And so that's a common thing that people would use to augment their job. And it goes on to more things than that. You can get side jobs. I'm an instructor with a consulting conglomerate called Alpha Zeta. And so when I have the opportunity to teach, even though it's not a full-time thing, that lands me in this where I want to be. And then, of course, you can have hobbies. And I don't think the world necessarily needs World of Warcraft. I'm not good enough at it to get paid for it, but I can put that onto my little Ikigai chart here. And then, volunteer for things like giving meetups. As I said, it's my passion, and so you may think, well, would you do that for free? There's no admission fee to this presentation. My YouTube channel isn't monetized. Yes, I'll do it for free. And so if you find yourself wanting to be a data scientist, but doing Kaggle competitions or data visualization for Makeover Monday or 100 Days of Code or reading or writing blog articles seems onerous to you, do you really want to be a data scientist? Now, it's important if you're going to do things for free that you set some boundaries. And for me, that means I do these presentations on my terms and my schedule. I decide what I'm presenting. I decide that animated GIFs are appropriate. And I get to say when I will give talks. Now, people can ask me, and I may agree, but if a potential client dictates what I will talk about or when, then they can pay me for it. And there's this idea that you can supplement your job with other parts of your life the way I've described it here. A useful tactic in mechanical engineering is to flip the narrative. So rather than supplementing your job with other parts of your life, you can first establish your life and then find a way to fund it. So even if you can't find a job as a data scientist, if you really love it and you have your Kaggle competitions or your Makeover Mondays or whatever you'd like, you can keep going with that, even if your job isn't what you prefer. And so you can take everything you like and balance it. And you can balance it for a long time, or a really long time. But unfortunately, the more things you balance, the more spectacular it is when it collapses. So now let's talk about finding the right job. And this is where I'm going to start talking about expert-driven models, where you're the expert. There are these data visualization called radar plots. They're normally used for visualizing radar measurements. So radar works, you point in a direction, and you send out some energy, and if there's something there at some range, you get a return, and you plot that at this angle, at some distance, there's an object. So they're also called polar charts, spider charts, like a spider web plots, etc. And I'm going to use this to look at relative powers and strengths for different aspects of a potential job. So I'm going to use this for ordinal variables because I had said that all of the Ikigai variables were ordinal, so they're going to be ranked. That one job you'd be better at than another with salary, and whether or not you get paid for it is continuous. But the objective here is to discriminate between jobs. So if I look at my 4 dimensions in Ikigai land, I have all of these ranked from 1 to 5, and the number in each one of those dots is how many points I'm going to give it. So in this example, doing things that's really good for the world is worth a lot of points. Things you enjoy, things you're good at. The pay, if it's low paid, it gives negative points. So now imagine you pick up a job ad and you're going to rank it. Now again, this is personalized. How you assign all of these ranks, how you assign all of these points, and how you describe any particular job on these axes will change. So if I have 2 theoretical jobs, a red one and a blue one, and I evaluate them that way, I can then total up all the points and decide red is 28, blue is 21. So for this scoring system, the red is a better job. Now I can use that a step further to personalize my CV, and I can scale it again on this generic 1 to 5 scale. Conceptual, what do I have exposure to, what am I proficient in, to what am I an expert in, or this kind of work that at the lowest level, I'm comfortable working in a team. The next level, I'm comfortable working independently. And at the highest level, I'm willing to lead a team in this area. Now this can be due to your ability or your preference. And you can make it public or private, because you may think it's a little weird if I talk about this kind of Ikigai radar chart. Sorry, not Ikigai. These are the 4 pillars from being a data scientist. So stats, programming, communication, and domain knowledge. Domain obviously depends on which domain, but here I've ranked all of them from 1 to 5, and I have 3 hypothetical job seekers. The data scientist, who's good at domain, and slightly less good, but about equal between the other 3. The programmer, and the statistician. And here I've used the kind of meme that data scientists are better programmers than statisticians and better statisticians than programmers. And so now if these are the 3 people applying for a job and I'm a hiring manager, I have a decision to make. Do I want to focus on the stats at the cost of programming, focus on the programming at the cost of stats, or take someone who's in between? Again, it may seem weird to say, well, why would you say you're weak at something? But let's say there's not 1 job available, but 2. Now the conversation shifts a bit, because if there's 2 roles available, I can get the statistician, the programmer, and have a better team. A lot of the discussion in data science these days is about assembling the right team, not just going out and get unicorns. So here I've added a unicorn to the mix that has a 5 in everything. And this I want to caution you against because, in my opinion, it's a trap. The idea behind these radar plots is to provide discrimination. And when you say everything's the same, the scaling's arbitrary. Saying you're a 5 in everything or a 1 in everything doesn't really mean much. So there's this pressure to say, yes, I'm an expert in everything. Most people aren't. And if you say you're an expert in everything, it looks a little fishy, and it raises the question of whether or not you have any specialty or you're just pushing to get the job. But again, that last point that this can be public or private, if you are unsure to say that the programmer here isn't very good at stats, you can keep this to yourself or just leave stats off as a variable. So this is how I rate myself according to the 4 pillars of data science, where I have stats being the lowest, not because I can't do math and stats, but because that's not where my professional career has taken me. Domain, again, depends on the domain, but really I'm more about the programming and the communication, where communication is both data visualization and mentoring. Now, one of the complaints about radar plots is it's a limited number of components. If I wanted to have a large number of skills here, a radar plot wouldn't work very well. But in my opinion, that's a strength because, of course, I could go out and list things and I could break them out into key skills and proficiencies and etc. And I can make this as long as you'd like. When you're applying for a role, especially in data science and development, it's likely that whoever's reviewing your application has a stack in front of them and they want to figure out who you are and what your strengths and weaknesses are as quickly as possible. And so what I'm talking about with a radar plot is to very quickly summarize things. And if you're going to say you're good at data visualization, it's a visualization. And if you want to use a bar chart or a line chart or gauges or whatever, fine. But radar plots, because you're limited to that 360 degrees, it forces you to really think about how you want to present yourself. And so I was talking to 2 junior data science graduates and giving them some advice on their CV and talking to them. And this is kind of how the 2 of them looked. That there was a young woman who preferred doing data visualization and a young man that was more excited about the programming. And I can put them on the 4 pillars just like this. But when I talked about communication with her, it was more visualization. And I said that about myself as well. And as I spoke to them more and more, they looked more like this. And so now I have 2 completely different sets of variables that I spoke to her, and she was most interested in doing data visualization in healthcare, coming from a sales background. Whereas he was formerly in marketing, but he didn't want to do it anymore. He got bitten by the data bug and now wanted to use neural networks and natural language processing, NLP. And here I've highlighted 2 things that are more behavioral. She was asking me some really good questions. She was very curious and very inquisitive and would follow up on things and ask for links and everything else. Whereas he had taken the initiative to arrange the meeting in the first place and scheduled everything, etc. So don't be afraid to put behavioral things on this too. Remember, they're not hiring skills, they're hiring you. And if there are behavioral things that you find really important in yourself, put them on your radar plot. And looking at these, you might think, well, the 2 of them shouldn't be applying for the same job. Just as we did with Ikigai, you can assign points to these. And as you're reading job descriptions, if the job says they want someone with visualization, she might give it 30. But if it says they want someone who does NLP, he might give it 40, and she may assign something to it, but it's not one of her core skills that she's trying to communicate. So with this idea of points, through Ikigai, through skills, you eventually get a way to score any job. Just as I did with the red-blue on the Ikigai chart, you go through and look for keywords, you find keywords and give them points accordingly. And so now I have 11 hypothetical jobs that I've scored. And as you go through it, you can check the rank. If nothing else, it tells you in which order you should apply to jobs. And you're looking for things that don't look right. So you may say that this second data scientist role, actually it should be above the data analyst role. And now, as a manager of models management, you need to decide, are you going to leave this model the way it is, and this is just an error, or are you going to go back and fiddle with your model to try to get this ranking exactly right? Now, another problem you may have is if one of these jobs toward the bottom you think should be way up at the top. If something like that happens, you probably missed a variable. There's probably something about this role that excites you more that you've left out. Conversely, you may look at one of these jobs at the top and think, well, actually, it should be down further. It may be that something should have a negative score, or that you've left out something, that a variable that should have a penalty to it. So it's not clear whether it's the variable wrong. Maybe you've overweighted one of the components in your Ikigai or in your set of key skills. And so this is how expert-driven methodologies work. You define what variables you want to use. You apply them according to some kind of points. You go back and look at your model, see how well it compares to your expectations, and then revise it, either by changing features or rescoring. And then when you have all these scores, you can either set a threshold. I'm only going to apply for things that have a score greater than 50. Or you can look at it in terms of numbers, that I'm only going to apply for the first 5 jobs. Or at least I'm going to apply for them in this order until I get a new job that I can rescore higher than where I am, or I run out of time. And so let's talk about some other resources that I've found that are interesting. So the first is this guy, Chris McKinley. For those of you in lockdown, he's got some interviews on YouTube, and there's a Wired article that he was in where I got this photo, and he was a PhD student that used data science to date. There's a online dating site called OkCupid, and it gives you a compatibility score. So he had a target variable, he optimized it, he used natural language processing to write his dating profile so that he would maximize his compatibility score with a bunch of people. And when I was talking to the 2 junior data scientists about this, the woman said, applying for jobs is a lot like online dating. And she's right. And if the job ad says you need to like pina coladas, and you don't really like pina coladas, but you want to date, so you say you do, the truth will come out. And the truth could go either way. Either that they really want someone who likes pina coladas and you don't, so it's over, or this mandatory requirement wasn't that mandatory after all. If you go and read the Wired article, it's pretty interesting, his thought process and his revision, and as he redefines what he wanted and why. And if you're in the data science or analytics field, you can understand all the steps he takes, and it's kind of interesting. The next resource is Micro, who is host of the TV show Dirty Jobs. The episodes are all up on YouTube now. Now, I'm not saying data scientist is a dirty job, but sometimes data sets make me wonder. His focus is primarily on America, although season 8 is in Australia, which is kind of interesting seeing him engage with Aussies. It doesn't quite translate well, which as an American, I can see why he struggles a bit. And he covers a range of jobs that you may have never considered but need to be done. And politically, I disagree with him on many points, which is why I recommend him get out of your data science bubble, explore world in new ways. But the one takeaway I want you to learn from him is you shouldn't do what you love, but instead love what you do. His big recommendations are to learn a skill, master it, and then learn to love it. And this idea of flipping the narrative, instead of finding something you love, getting good at it, and getting a job in it, if you can reverse that, it's another way to look at things. The last one is Bill Schmarzo. He's the so-called Dean of Big Data. He has a really good blog. He makes a lot of excellent infographics, and he has a YouTube channel where he goes over the infographics, and he has a vlog with hashtag Schmarzo Speaks. He's the only Bill Schmarzo on LinkedIn. He was the Chief Innovation Officer of Hitachi Vantara, and he's got a podcast. He's got a book, if you will. It's kind of a collection of PowerPoint slides called The Art of Thinking Like a Data Scientist. Because he's a C-level executive, he views data science kind of from the top down. And if you look at what he says, it's a very different perspective than what I'm used to, which is kind of building a model and going from the ground up. So I recommend looking him up and seeing some of the things he has to say, because again, it's outside your standard data science bubble. And finally, in terms of other resources, you get the usual things: blogs, articles, courses. The LinkedIn data science community is actually quite good. And secondly, you have each other. It's something that I find odd at these meetups, that there's all these data science experts floating around and very few of them talk. I don't know, maybe just too many introverts out there. But you can help each other reviewing your CVs. A challenge I give to people is write, here's the job ad, spend a couple minutes looking at it, and then I'll give you my CV, and in 20 seconds tell me whether or not I'm qualified. Because remember, if you put yourself in the shoes of the hiring manager, they've got a stack of CVs, and they need to know as quickly as possible whether to keep reading yours or to move on to the next one. So if you go through this kind of role play where the two of us can sit down and I'll read a job that you're considering applying for, you read a job that I'm considering applying for, and then give ourselves minimal time to assess the other one. And if you're talking to someone else, you can brainstorm. What keywords should you use? What should your dimensions on your radar plot be? What are words that are hot right now? What are words that are buzzwords and will probably go away? And what are some technologies? This space is evolving very quickly. I can't keep up with everything. I don't think any one person really can. So if you talk to each other about what tools they're using, you can get a bigger and broader set of possible things. And if you ask me what technologies I think are important, they're not really technologies. There's more 3 topics. Set boundaries, so people don't take advantage of you, so that when you're doing things you love for free, that you can still make a living. Empathy, to recognize that everyone else also has boundaries. And communication, to establish where your boundaries are, ask them where they are, and navigate a common ground. And if it comes to it where actually there is no common ground, to respectfully walk away. And those 3 skills will help you no matter what type of role you enter. Data analyst, data scientist, business analyst, journey expert, CEO. Wherever you go, these 3 skills will help you. So if I go into some conclusions, if I look at my radar plots, kind of in retrospect, I've gone through this exercise and here's my radar plot. Take 15 seconds and see how much of me you understand from this. I'm going to put this on my CV, and when I put this on my CV, I want 2 things. A job isn't one of them. I want to get an interview, and if I get the interview, I want to be able to direct the conversation with this plot. So when someone asks me, who are you? Tell us about yourself in 30 seconds. I use R to automate tasks and teach junior data scientists how it's done. So the 3 things that I have as a 5 on my radar plot are in my summary. Now, if I think about myself 20 years ago and go for a nice fun trip down memory lane, again, I'm going to give you the task of estimating me in about 15 seconds. My radar plot looks something like that. And here's where I was saying that radar plot's a good thing is it restricts you. It makes you really, really trim down the number of topics, because in my younger years, I would have thought, well, more topics is better. My question to you is, what do you think? And secondly, if you go through them, very few of them are the same. The only thing that's kind of the same is, in my current state, I call it mentoring, but back then I wanted the title teacher, so I put teaching there. But hopefully you can see that the thing that's the same isn't really the word, but the concept behind the word, that I like being involved in developing others. I like teaching. I like presenting to meetups, etc. The only other one that's the same is automation. I like being able to set things out and make these nice transitions from one point to another. The programming languages are different. Today I use R and SQL. I didn't know R existed. When I first started using R, I hated it. I wanted to use MATLAB. I can use C, but I'm not very good at it. I didn't know SQL existed. And these other techniques, wavelets, fuzzy logic, I don't think those are taught anymore. But once upon a time, I was going to use them to solve all the problems and rule the world. go become CEO of a company. Well, at least now I'm CEO if I want to call myself that. And so when you're going through this, keep in mind that not even Master Yoda can see the future. Even if you set up your radar plot today, 5 years it might be different, and that's fine. And the advice I have there for you is a bit of wisdom from Yogi Berra, that when you come to a fork in the road, take it. Now, when he made this quote, it was because there was a fork in the road and eventually the two paths joined up again. That's not what I'm saying here. If you were to ask me 20 years ago if I thought I'd be in Australia, sitting alone in a room, speaking to a camera about a job that I didn't know existed, none of that was part of the plan. None of it. And yet, here we are. So when you get to a fork in the road, whether it's in your professional or personal life, take it. And trust yourself and your judgment to make the best decision you have based on the information you have. Wisdom to realize when you've gotten it wrong. And faith in your family, your friends, and your colleagues to find you if you get lost. In summary, consider what it is about being a data scientist that would be important to you. And move beyond these 4 pillars. They may be a good job to summarize in general what a data scientist is, but what's special about you. The other point is what you work on, maybe what you focus on when you're applying, but who you work for can be more important, especially if you're going to push a job into a certain direction. If you're going to make a job more Ikigai for you, having a supportive manager goes a very long way. And then this idea of Ikigai models and radar plots can help you build an assessment so that when you look at a job ad, you can figure out how suitable that job is for you. As I said in the beginning, this is very personal, very preference-based, and yours should look different to everyone else in chat. It can be based on your skills or interest. So if you're brand new to analytics, build a radar plot based on your interests, not necessarily your skills. And I do encourage you to share it around, because even if you have weaknesses in some areas, if someone's building a team, it can actually be a stronger statement than you might think. But you can keep it public or private. If it's private, if you're just looking at it to review yourself, it can still help you get your elevator pitch and get you to have a very succinct description of who you are and what you can do to help an organization. And so in general, don't worry about becoming a data scientist. If you want to be a data scientist, go be a data scientist. However, getting paid for it is different. If it's not something, however, that you would do for free within your boundaries, you can question whether or not it's going to be the right role for you. And titles and degrees are imperfect classifiers. And even those of you who become data scientists, there will be type 1 and type 2 errors. There will be those of you who have the title data scientist that when you look back on it and look at what you're doing, you think, this isn't data science. And there will be others who have some other title, but again, when you look at what you're doing, you think, yeah, this is what it's all about. This is data science. And finally, you don't need to have the sexiest job of the 21st century. It'll be fine. And in fact, you can still be sexy. If you have any questions, if you want to chat with me about anything, look me up on LinkedIn. My company does have a webpage, and this talk and all my other talks are on YouTube. It's not monetized. Special thanks to the Time Series Forecasting and Citizens Data Scientists groups for hosting this event virtually. And of course, Jiffy.com, because there's so many GIFs in so little time. And to all of you for your attention and patience. Thank you.